Red Bull's second team, formerly known as Alpha Tauri, have failed to make the most of the new regulations, while their sister team has absolutely dominated the sport. For 2024 though, that will all be changing, with the teams working closer together in an attempt to create two incredibly competitive outfits. With the departing team boss slamming the performance of Alpha Tauri, can they bounce back in 2024? And will the closer working relationship with their sister team cause problems in the F1 paddock? Today, I'll talk about what Franz Tost said about his final years with the team, and why the rest of the grid are ready to go to war against Red Bull. At 67 years old, Franz Tost was F1's second longest serving team principal. In 2005, Tost was appointed as the team principal of Scuderia Toro Rosso, which was the new name of the former Minardi team after Red Bull acquired them. Since then, he's guided many of the sport's greatest drivers through the early years of their careers, molding them into the unstoppable forces that have competed at motorsport's highest level. First, there was Sebastian Vettel, then Daniel Ricciardo, Max Verstappen and Carlos Sainz followed them. More recently, Pierre Gasly and Alex Albon have passed through the team as they found their feet in Formula 1. 18 years in the same role is an impressive feat. Only Red Bull boss Christian Horner has been in his post longer of the current crop of team principals. And while under his leadership, AlphaTauri have completed more than 350 Grand Prix, which have yielded 2 wins, 5 podiums and over 800 points. Tost is irritated he never achieved his long-standing goal of P5 in the Constructors' Championship. P6 was their best, achieved in 2008, 2019 and 2021. I'm not happy or proud. The target was to finish 5th in the Constructors' Championship and we didn't achieve this goal, he says. Therefore, there's no reason to be happy or proud. I'm upset we didn't achieve this goal. I'm thinking to myself, why you were too stupid to do this? Formula 1 is very fair. Either you can do it, or you're not clever enough. It is perhaps the curse of being Red Bull's second team that caused this failure. While he succeeded in many aspects, such as nurturing 2 drivers into world champions, his team's performance was always hamstrung by a reduced budget and inexperienced drivers. While Red Bull Racing dominated both championships this year, AlphaTauri spent most of the season in last before a late surge of 4 points finishes at 5 Grand Prix jumped it ahead of Haas and Sauber, and almost Williams too. Those lower table struggles are set to end going forwards though, something that will frustrate Tost after all those years of having to make do. For a long time, AlphaTauri have bought parts from Red Bull that were a season old, or developed their own parts but on a much smaller budget than their sister team. That changed this season though, as the new Red Bull board decided that AlphaTauri wouldn't be a training gym for their young drivers anymore. It would be a fully fledged competitive F1 team. The AT04 was heavily upgraded through the season, with close attention paid by rivals to the sequence of floor updates from the Singapore Grand Prix onwards, as variants appeared in Austin and at the season finale in Abu Dhabi as well. AlphaTauri's Singapore package was a significant overhaul that included a switch to parts of the Red Bull RB19's rear suspension. It started the season using the RB18's rear end, as using older Red Bull parts has been the team's preference for several years. Even though a mid-season switch to buying different parts is unorthodox, it is allowed by F1's regulations governing which parts a team may purchase from another, and is not really any different to any team doing their own suspension upgrade. Aston Martin buys their rear suspension off their engine supplier Mercedes, for example. Despite starting to buy parts off Red Bull, AlphaTauri insisted throughout the season that its own aerodynamic development has been the primary driver of its improved form. AlphaTauri's impressive new upgrades, and talk from Red Bull boss Christian Horner that the teams will now be working closer together, has raised concerns among the rest of the team principals. Those concerns are about information passing both ways. Those at the bottom of the grid, battling AlphaTauri for valuable places, are worried about them having an unfair advantage due to information and parts from Red Bull. Those at the front of the grid are worried about how AlphaTauri's development might help Red Bull improve as well. With the late season upgrades giving AlphaTauri major gains in low-speed corners, an area of weakness for Red Bulls, rivals started considering how high the junior team might climb, and whether any sharing of resources might also help Red Bull eke out its restricted wind tunnel testing allowance. While the Red Bull F1 boss Christian Horner has rubbished the suggestions that any rules are being broken, and the FIA has completed compliance checks, McLaren CEO Zak Brown says he still has big concerns over the alliance. We have some big concerns over the alliance between AlphaTauri and Red Bull. I think that is something that needs to be addressed in the future. So I still think the sport has a way to go to make sure that everyone is truly independent. Teams may form technical alliances. Currently, the most intertwined is the working relationship between Haas and Ferrari. They can buy specified components, including hydraulics, gearbox and suspension, as well as engines and a huge list of little bits and bobs. The construction of an F1 engine has a huge effect on how the gearbox has to be designed and how the rear suspension has to be designed, so by allowing all of these parts to be purchased, it saves some of the smaller teams having to spend millions designing parts that will have to be made a certain way anyway. Before I talk more about the details of the rest of the grid spheres, I want to let you know that over the Christmas holidays, we'll be releasing a 3-hour video on the complete history of Formula 1. Or at least as complete a history as you can give in 3 hours. We'll highlight some of the best seasons, the craziest technical developments, and the stories of the most famous racing drivers of each decade. We're super excited to share it with you all, so make sure to subscribe so you don't miss it when it drops. Fears that Red Bull and AlphaTauri have overstepped the limits of the technical partnerships have been fueled by AlphaTauri moving personnel from Faenza to the UK, as it seeks to save money by consolidating around its aerodynamics facility in Bicester. Zach Brown continued, "It is 2 teams with common ownership, which you wouldn't have in other sports. It could benefit Red Bull in a lot of different ways. There is a reason why they're moving a lot of their people from Italy. As Helmut has said, they're going to do absolutely everything they can to benefit from having 2 teams. I get that because that's what the rules say, but I think we need to look at the governance of the sport around technical alliances. This isn't the first time that these concerns have been raised about customer teams and technical alliances. When Haas was at its most competitive way back in 2018, plenty of people questioned where their performance was coming from. The situation is beginning to escalate behind the scenes. Some teams want collaborations to be clamped down on more for the next set of rules in 2026 and have that augmented by the Concord Agreement as well, to put more emphasis on independence within F1's governments, not just its regulations. It's easy to see how a big advantage could be gained by 2 teams working together. As an example, one team could focus on the design of the rear suspension while the other focused on the front. Let's say it normally costs a team $1 million to design their front and rear suspension. Well, if Red Bull are only designing the front suspension, then they could spend $1 million on that, while AlphaTauri spend $1 million on the rear suspension. So while everyone else has spent $1 million designing their suspension, the Red Bull teams basically have spent $2 million designing theirs. There is a list of components that teams can't buy off each other, but the list that they can buy is far longer, and the Red Bull teams could do this to all of that. But beyond the list of what parts teams can and cannot buy from one another, the regulations do outline strict requirements for preventing the transfer of data, designs, drawings, or any other intellectual property, the receipt of information, consultancy, or any other kind of services from another competitor, or the sharing of any methodologies. While there has been no specific accusations of wrongdoing by the 2 Red Bull teams, the implication is that some other teams still feel the rules need to be tighter to reduce the risk. Although the FIA does not want to get into monitoring personnel's day-to-day movements to police any and all potential exchanges across teams, one example of other ideas that have been discussed is for the FIA to be able to conduct spot checks of team facilities at almost no notice. There is also set to be further guidance issued to teams about what can be done to convince the FIA that nothing untoward is happening behind the scenes. If the other teams do suspect something illegal is happening, they'll have to be able to prove that Red Bull are doing something illegal, not the other way around. As far as the FIA is concerned, nothing about AlphaTauri's progress in 2023 or its rate of upgrades has set any alarm bells ringing. Teams decide to spend their money in different ways, said Nicolas Tombazis, the FIA's F1 director. Sometimes teams carry out modifications to the floor which are more local and therefore don't involve throwing everything away. We haven't seen anything in AlphaTauri that is concerning us. Tombazis has admitted it's a live concern to make sure teams that collaborate in ways the regulations allow are well segregated. However, he stressed that it is not only between the 2 teams owned by Red Bull. Tombazis said that actively splitting design work to evaluate which ideas are best would be heavily illegal, although is not suspected of the 2 Red Bull teams. He suggested the FIA's checks would root out any such illicit tactics, because when teams have run similar aerodynamic components in the past, they've been challenged to prove their development process was organic, such as during the Pink Mercedes scandal involving Racing Point. As a refresher, the Pink Mercedes moniker came up when Racing Point, now Aston Martin, showed up to the 2020 F1 season with a pink RP20, which was so similar to the Mercedes 2019 title-winning car that it was dubbed the Pink Mercedes. Horner revealed that rival teams' concerns about Red Bull and AlphaTauri doing the same thing were unnecessary. Look, we're an awfully long way from a Pink Mercedes. There are some transferable components that are clearly listed within the regulations that you're allowed to supply, and that's what they get. When you look at the AlphaTauri car, there are quite fundamental differences between that car and a Red Bull racing car. And arguably, there are other cars on the grid which are far closer in concept than an AlphaTauri is. You've only got to look at an Aston Martin or even a McLaren. If you look around the rear suspension of McLaren, it's very close in concept to that of our own, the 50-year-old Briton pointed out. Until we see the cars hit the track for testing in Bahrain in February, it is impossible to even guess at how close the new technical relationship will be between the two teams. Red Bull aren't stupid though. They know that every other team will be looking for anything that could be overstepping the line of legality. Will this be another Pink Mercedes situation? Or will Red Bull do the sensible thing of staying within the lines of legality? Let me know your thoughts in the comments down below, and until next time, drive safe and bye for now.